matter who wins the elections, whether it's Trump or Harris, it will be bad news for all of us, and we need to be prepared. This country is going to hell, and no matter how the ruling class tries to spin it and cast blame, nothing will change the reality that US imperialism is crumbling and wants to leave us trapped beneath the rubble when it does. But the burning question is what to do about it? How do you unite the working class to put it in a better position to fight back? And what I aim to try to convince you of by the end of this presentation is the need to split the workers' movement from liberalism. But first, I want to describe what I mean by that, liberalism. Liberalism is the key ideological weapon that the US imperialists have used to expand their hegemony and to stifle any resistance to it. So, for example, it's been in the name of human rights imperialism, fully backed by the United Nations, I may add, that the US has expanded its dominance, turning countries into colonial subjects. It has been in the name of feminism and saving women from clerical reaction that imperialists have raped and pillaged Africa. In the name of saving democracy, that they have dropped bombs on the Middle East. In the name of anti-racist liberalism and identity politics, that this country's racist ruling class has been able to get away with pretending that they care about Black people while at the same time keeping them segregated at the bottoms of society and alienating white and other workers. Nearly every attack by the neoliberal order on the working class in the US has been carried out under the guise of progressive politics. Yet a number of leftist groups and those in the workers' movement dismiss out of hand when we say that the main task today is to fight liberalism, the main obstacle that has held back working class struggles and which has led to right-wing backlash. Now, I'm from Buffalo, New York, and those of us from colder climates know what it's like to be snowed in. Well, if you want to leave your house or free your car from a blanket of snow, what do? You get out a shovel, remove the icy obstacles standing in the way, because otherwise you're not going to be able to go anywhere. And it's the same thing, really, when it comes to the left and the workers' movement today. Time and again, worker struggles, Black struggles, anti-imperialist struggles have been stuck in the ice and unable to go anywhere because of a refusal of the left to even begin to chip at and break down the obstacles standing in the way. It's been the left's adherence to things like identity politics of the imperialist ruling class and adherence to the misleaders of the labor movement, who are the agents of this ruling class, that has rendered all these struggles impotent. So in order to explain further, I think it's necessary, to look at the state of the working class today, an issue which I think a lot of you here are familiar with. So at the DNC, at the end of the summer, the Democrats offered the working class nothing new. Kamala Harris, pitched her opportunity economy, which amounts to nothing more than a warmed over version of Bidenomics with some populist tinged rhetoric against price gouging corporations thrown in for good measure, to distract from the central role of the Biden-Harris administration in pushing inflationary policy and purposefully setting the stage for that price gouging. The last 4 years of Bidenomics have not worked out so well for the working class or Black people or Latinos or the vast majority of the population for that matter. The cost of living is higher than ever. Black and Latino communities are pitted against each other, and newly arrived migrants are pitted against one another for scarce resources in many Democratic-run cities. Murderous cop terror is at historic levels. Good jobs are increasingly hard to come by, especially since formerly good jobs like Boeing here, air assembly done by machinists, have been turned into the very opposite by the bosses' drive for profits. And the wreck that the aerospace giant has made of its production process and the squeezing of its unionized workforce and the disaster that has followed in its wake is representative of an all-around capitalist decay in the United States. The U.S. ruling class, which has long had the rest of the world underneath its thumb, is now losing its grip on the situation. It is creating crises faster than it can solve them, but neither Boeing nor the rest of the capitalist class here can possibly turn back the clock to a time of undisputed dominance. The bosses have dug themselves deep in a hole, which they can climb out of only on the backs of workers. Well aware that U.S. imperialism's slide can only be slowed at the expense of working people, the bosses' two parties are vying to convince workers that they are their friends, not by committing to any real change, but rather through gimmicks, all the better to take the White House and unleash a new round of attacks against the working class and the oppressed. In their own way, workers know that trouble is ahead. Ever since the DNC, the working class has grown increasingly restive. Strikes have flared up across the country, from AT&T workers in the South to Boeing machinists here in the Pacific Northwest and ILA longshoremen on the Eastern Gulf Coast. But even while workers have displayed a willingness to fight for relief from staggering prices and job and retirement insecurity, their leadership has done everything to restrain those impulses and keep them within the bounds considered safe by the liberal capitalist order. These leaders, while they have to produce results to not lose control over the ranks, are materially invested in maintaining their connections to the ruling class, which has bestowed privileges on them in return for their service. This is evident with both the ILA strike that happened just a little while ago, and also with this Boeing strike here. In the case of the Longshore strike, when the ILA went out on strike and stopped the supply chain, it put them in direct confrontation with the U.S. ruling class. However, the ILA president, Harold Daggett, will have longshoremen believe that the problem facing workers is just the foreign-owned shipping companies. But let's get real. USMX is overseen by the U.S. ruling class, who calls all the shots at the ports. Everything that companies like Maersk do is under their watch. And that was not just a battle that the ILA was waging against USMX, but the entire U.S. world order, which is why the White House got involved in it, just so things didn't get out of hand. So far from organizing an uncompromising battle on the eve of the strike, ILA President Daggett did the utmost to pledge allegiance to this country's ruling elite, claiming that ILA stands for I Love America, and undermining the strike by vowing to keep military cargo loaded. Daggett's Pledge of Allegiance is not to the workers of America, but to the U.S. world order. His rants about I Love America mean nothing less than I love the ruling class, which is squeezing working people at home and creating wars and genocide abroad. Now, longshoremen not handling military cargo would have done a lot more to give alleviation to Palestinians than all the half-hearted displays of sympathy that have been put out by union bureaucrats calling on Biden and Harris to demand a ceasefire, for example. But the 3-day ILA strike battle lasted just long enough for workers to flex their power and to have them let off some steam. They were hustled back onto the job on the grounds that an incomplete wage package had been hashed out, and union leaders not only demobilized the strike, but gave away significant leverage that they had by pushing off the possibility of the strike's resumption until January, which is well after peak season and holiday season for the supply and shipping industries. It was almost as if the whole affair was orchestrated in a smoke-filled room with ILA President Daggett, the USMX bosses alliance, and the Biden-Harris Secretary, Labor Secretary Julie Su, which is also involved in these negotiations. Now, many workers that we've talked to in the ILA, particularly Southern workers, are pissed off that Daggett called off the strike and feel like they have nothing much to show for it. However, just as many are also holding their ire to see what happens in January. Now, what Daggett was trying to do was save himself to emerge better off from the strike. From talking tough about waging war and, claiming to get a little bit of money, from shaking a little bit of money from the bosses. He promised a 62% wage increase, but that's all contingent on whether or not the USMX bosses, agreed to come up with a deal in January. So it's not even solidified for these workers. But the results of his actions has been that Biden and Harris have emerged better off for not having gone all railroad workers on the ILA. And instead, the Democrats wrangled some deal where Taft-Hartley was all but imposed in name by Daggett, and the USMX has regained the upper hand right now. Now, the 1-2 punch of both the Boeing strike here and the Longshore strikes on the East and Gulf Coast really had the potential to spark a broader working class counteroffensive to push back against this country's rulers, but the ILA leadership has succeeded for now in removing workers as a factor, and in the process made the union more vulnerable to the boss's demands. Now, IAM district head, you know him well, John Holden, is going the opposite route of Daggett, but to the same end of demobilizing labor struggle. He's dragging it out. A few days before the contract expiration, the leadership rubbed elbows with Julie Su and pledged to do everything to ensure Harris's election. But the contract it attempted to ram through, claiming never before seen improvements, was seen as the sellout that it was by the ranks here, who universally rejected it and launched a strike. And never wanting the strike in the first place, Holden and his team have sabotaged it at every step, keeping picket lines small and porous, distributing inadequate strike pay, failing to ensure delivery of picket assignments to 1/3 of the membership, and so on. But perhaps the most damning has been the union bureaucrats here giving up picketing at a Renton gate after the line proved effective at stopping the flow of parts into that plant. Teamsters were even honoring it, but nearby small businesses complained, undoubtedly in cahoots with Boeing, that they too were not receiving deliveries. So what did the IAM leadership do? They disbanded the picket line. And that is not the only such case. Another Renton gate was given up after relatively well-off residents made noise and complaints as well. Now, the union bureaucracy claims that one day longer is one day stronger. Excuse me. But it is not. It is demoralizing and subjects the machinists to increased economic pressure to fold the strike, especially when the picket lines are not serving their purpose to actually stop scabs or parts deliveries. Now, some of this demoralization was evident in the vote on the new contract offer recently, but the final tally was still 2-1, a sign that the commonly heard chance of, but it was also a sign that the commonly heard chance of, no pension, no planes, or no pension, no wrenching, etc., are deeply felt by the machinists. Now, during both the ILA and the Boeing strikes here, as you know, we've been trying to fight to change the outcome of the strikes in favor of the working class. But key to doing that is exposing how the misleadership of these unions stand in the way of progress. Now, for the ILA, that means a fight to break down the segregation of the locals on the East and Gulf Coast by race and craft, which are enforced by the Daggett bureaucracy. These divisions there weaken the union and play right into the boss's divide and rule schemes, a subject which I'll return to in just a little bit. But the bottom line is, to prepare to win the battles that lie ahead, the ILA needs a strategy that can win against the current leadership that is holding it back. Now, in regards to Boeing here, the die is not yet cast yet in the strike. A corps of machinists, like you here, could actually act now to turn things around and show what is necessary to build mass picket lines that shut down Boeing tight by appealing to the entire membership and reaching out to other unions at the company and in the area on the basis that the machinist strike is a battle for all of labor. Boeing is hurting. Its credit status has been downgraded. It is bleeding cash, and it is missing delivery dates. And a solid punch delivered now could make all the difference to the outcome for this strike. Boeing has created a safety and quality crisis in aerospace that is a danger not only to the machinists on the factory floor, as you know, but also for the people flying in the skies. And a strike waged to put the union in charge of matters would not only have the potential to win the machinist economic demands, but also to establish union control of safety and quality, and in the process galvanize widespread support among working people in this entire Seattle area. But thus far, Holden has adhered to the IAM leadership's pledge and kept the strike under wraps to help keep Harris's election chances alive. Now, at the first and to date, the only strike rally initiated by Holden 2 weeks ago, he made it an indoor showcase for Democratic Party politicians like Senator Maria Cantwell, who returned the favor by writing an official letter demanding that the union come to terms immediately. The Democrats and union bureaucrats want things wrapped up quietly before the elections. And some of you here, as the mobilized group, intervened to turn the rally into a march to a nearby picket line and a show of force there, which was a good thing. After the latest insufficient offer was announced, you guys in the mobilized group here also issued a statement calling for its rejection, and together with our supporters here from Workers' Vanguard, helped to rally the no vote, including by tabling outside of the polling places. The rejection of the offer was a victory, and it was in part because of the efforts that you did. But the war is far from won, and now it remains as urgent as ever for the machinists to escalate the strike to win. Now, a forward-looking strike committee can be the crucial factor to resetting the strike battle and bringing victory to the machinists and all of labor, but only if its members proceed from a shared purpose. To gather together all those who recognize that Holden's team is demobilizing the strike, and that it falls on the ranks to take the fight to Boeing. Holden is incapable of creating a crisis for Boeing out of his desire for a partnership with the bosses, his reliance on the Democratic politicians, and his insistence on following every rule designed to shield the bosses from a strike. He never wanted the strike in the first place and is sabotaging it at every step. Now, machinists like yourselves who want to take the bull by the horns, must convince, other machinists to reject the IAM leadership's losing strategy and mobilize their union brothers, sisters, and siblings and all the working class allies to bring Boeing's operations to a complete halt. And even a handful of machinists, just a few, who go to the picket lines to raise this understanding that picket lines mean don't cross, can lay the groundwork for mass picket lines that no scab, would dare to even approach. Now, reaching out to Teamsters and ILWU Longshore workers to coordinate action to stop Boeing's part deliveries would show another way forward. Boeing and the IAM leadership would certainly take notice if some striking machinists were to picket outside of Boeing's non-union North Charleston plant, for example, both to agitate about the strike and to encourage workers there to join the union. Appeals to other unions and other working people to contribute financially to the strike as an expression of solidarity would help sustain those of you here, the machinists, and helping them to continue their struggle as well. Now, this is something else that Holden has not even really attempted to do. What is ultimately necessary is a new leadership of the unions that will fight in the interests of workers, not the bosses and their politicians. Now, we support and fight for class struggle caucuses in the unions and committees to take up these issues and to combat liberalism and economism. And we do this all over from, here and regarding the Boeing strike, but also with transit in New York and Longshore on the West Coast. We support the campaigns and committees formed by militant workers in the union fighting for a different strategy from the existing leadership. And so the working class must do everything it can to put itself in a better position, not just in trade union struggles, but in all arenas, including in the elections. And right now, workers are caught in the crosshairs of supporting one capitalist master or another, which is why we must fight for a working class alternative in the elections. Now, the Trump years were a catastrophe for working people, capped by the pandemic and the accompanying largely democratic orchestrated lockdowns that brought mass layoffs, atomized the working class, and disrupted the supply chain. However, the inflation-filled Biden-Harris years, though, have been even more of a catastrophe. So much so that many working class voters, despite their personal dislike of Trump, are holding their nose and voting for him anyway as the lesser evil, which is a term that was long reserved for the Democratic candidate in the presidential elections. These workers believe that Trump's economic policies will result in a slightly better trickle-down effect to them. However, such calculations, while they might seem practical, are simply another version of picking your poison. Either way, you end up dead. The liberals, ever ready to launch their woke moral crusades, denounce these Trump supporters as backwards, causing them to dig in their heels and dig in their support to Trump's right-wing populism. The indignant liberals would have workers set aside real-life questions, like how are you going to put a roof over your head? Or how are you going to provide the next meal on the table? And this is certainly no way forward for workers. Neither Trump nor the Democrats have answers that will transform what exists right now, the status quo, in a way that qualitatively improves conditions for working people. To bring that about, workers and the oppressed must take every opportunity to register its opposition to a Democratic or a Republican White House. In the context of the elections, it is possible to register just such opposition by voting for the Party for Socialism and Liberation's presidential ticket of Claudia de la Cruz and Karina Garcia. The PSL, as they are known, has based its campaign on two essential pillars: opposition to lesser evilism, in particular the Democratic Party variety, and opposition to capitalism. These two pillars make it possible not only to rally working class support among the millions fed up with the Democratic Party of economic ruin and Palestinian genocide, but also to channel that opposition in a direction that gives workers and the oppressed a fighting chance to advance their struggles. The stronger the turnout for PSL in a week from now and next Tuesday, the stronger will be the position of the working class to wage struggle against whichever reactionary candidate emerges on top and takes the White House in November. However, other left groups have invoked differences with PSL to back out of supporting them, even critically, as we do, its presidential ticket. We ourselves have fundamental differences with PSL. While it fights for a rupture between the working class and the Democratic Party, it refuses to fight for a rupture with liberal Democratic Party politics. Those liberal politics, which exist both inside and outside the Democratic Party, have been the main ideological glue holding the working class enthralled to U.S. imperialism. Assuming the goal was to set the workers and oppressed on a course capable of advancing their interests, that liberal glue cannot be ignored or added to. It must be actively exposed for what it is and dissolved, replaced by an alternative that sets the working class in motion, independent of and in opposition to U.S. imperialism. Now, the PSL expresses this refusal to combat liberal politics in any number of ways: support to the uncommitted, ruse to garner more votes for Harris, support to the UN ceasefire resolutions that are a cover for continued genocide, courting Green Party candidate Jill Stein as an ally in the struggle. However, despite these and other fundamental differences, we recognize the significance of PSL's campaign to the working class. It provides a rallying point for our class forces in opposition to the Democrats and in opposition to capitalism, despite their failure to break with liberalism. That failure undermines their campaign and is like a dagger aimed straight at its heart. And the closer election day comes, the louder the liberal drums will beat for PSL to back off so Harris doesn't lose votes. Already, the Democrats have been seeking to tamper with ballots in various swing states by having Claudia and Karina removed. And for their part, many on the socialist left have all but removed PSL as an option by refusing to campaign for them, leaving workers either in the hands of capitalist politicians like Trump or Harris, or the Green Party's Jill Stein, who doesn't represent workers' interests either. Why? Because the Green Party is a small-time liberal capitalist party. Collecting more votes for Jill Stein is not a vote to fundamentally change the status quo to the benefit of working people. It is a way to pour more glue on working people to make them stick more solidly to the capitalist system. Leftist groups that you may have heard of, like Socialist Alternative or Workers Strike Back, present Stein as an independent anti-war candidate because she is not anti-capitalist in any way. In truth, they salute Stein for her wish list of liberal reforms, like calling for universal health care, a $25 minimum wage, universal rent control, banning fracking, ending existing war, and so on. However, as a ILA Longshore worker recently told me, if wishes were fishes, we'd have something to fry. Now, while many of these reforms on Stein's wish list are supportable, like, low-income housing, free healthcare, increasing the minimum wage, and so on, left in Stein's hands, they are all just Band-Aids on the rotting and gaping wound of capitalism, all to be fought for, from her perspective, in conjunction with other progressives to pressure the Democratic Party to come to its non-existent senses. This liberal approach will never achieve something like universal health care, which requires head-on confrontation with a major component of the U.S. ruling class, particularly the private sector of the healthcare industry. Now, not only will liberals like Jill Stein not achieve any major reform, they are not a step in the right direction either. The alliance with elements in the ruling class that is at the heart of the liberal strategy is a guarantee that she will betray. Stein is a perfect example of someone with liberal Democratic Party politics outside of the Democratic Party. In fact, her agenda shares a striking similarities and resemblance to that of Bernie Sanders in 2016, when he was running for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination. Trump is in fact made stronger, not just by lesser evilism, but also by liberal politics across the board, which inflame racial divisions and drive especially white workers into Trump's corner by blaming them for racial oppression. Now, a good chunk of the working class is not especially fond of the Greens either, and for good reason. They want to wipe out whole industries. And the Green Party is hardly a vehicle to unite the working class around a common fight, whether it be a fight to stop the genocide in Gaza or a fight to improve working conditions at home. To do this, we need a class war and an anti-imperialist struggle, not the anti-war liberal pacifism that the Green Party's Jill Stein represents. Now, earlier this month, in time for the anniversary of October 7th, many left groups issued statements reflecting on the state of the pro-Palestinian struggle, and a sober assessment is in order. The U.S.-backed Zionist genocide, an offensive in Gaza, poses point-blank genocide or Palestinian liberation. Over the past year in the U.S., millions have hit the streets. Encampments last spring swept college campuses, and unions passed one ceasefire resolution after another. And there is no shortage of expressions of solidarity with the Palestinian people, and the level of protest activity to draw attention to the Palestinian cause has been substantially higher recently than it has at any point ever before, particularly in the US. But the results have not been so impressive when measured in terms of the actual position of the Palestinian people right now. The Zionist war machine has major headwinds in its sails. It has not only devastated Gaza, slaughtered vast numbers of Palestinians, and imposed a direct military occupation, but is also systematically escalating its attacks against Hamas's regional allies, wiping out top leadership of Hezbollah, and has invaded southern Lebanon. The Zionist rulers are threatening major regional war with Iran. To protect their strategic interest, this country's rulers have completely aligned themselves with the Zionist state and stand squarely behind it against the Palestinians. Now, the only way to dislodge the U.S. from this position is to mobilize and unleash a countervailing force that threatens the U.S. imperialists with even greater losses than they would sustain by abandoning Israel. As currently organized right now, the pro-Palestinian movement in the U.S. can't possibly be such a force because it clings to the Democratic Party, the very party overseeing the genocide. The movement will never be directed towards direct confrontation with U.S. imperialism as long as it looks to keep on board imperialist Democratic Party politicians. To stop the genocide and to free Palestine, the movement must be directed in an entirely different direction towards class war, the mobilization of workers and the oppressed, not to convince Democrats to come to the rescue of the Palestinians by, say, negotiating a ceasefire, but to deliver the kind of blows that outright weaken U.S. domination. Now, a year on, the Palestinian movement in the U.S. has achieved none of its objectives, and the task of socialists like us is to reorient it in order to make victory possible. And the first step to doing that is to break its chain to the Democratic Party. Much of the left, however, rather than seeking such a reorientation, simply want to push the movement further down its current track. Well, this is not anti-imperialism. It is important to be clear what makes movement anti-imperialist. It is not the subjective will of its participants, most of whom hate U.S. support to genocide and want Palestine to be free. What would make it anti-imperialist is to put it on a course to directly challenge imperialist interests, such as by organizing working class action to refuse to handle war material bound for Israel, a movement bound to even the most progressive capitalist politicians like Rashida Tlaib, for example, and seeking allies within the working class cannot possibly mount such a challenge. Now, there is a view among some of the left more broadly that UAW president Shawn Fain is an ally to advancing the struggle of the Palestinians and the workers more generally. However, Fain, with much fanfare from the left liberals, pushed through a UAW ceasefire resolution right after selling short an auto worker strike that, if fought as an all-out clash with the bosses, could have turned the tide for labor and done far more for Palestinian liberation than 1,000 ceasefire resolutions combined. His left critics are fuming now because, for all of Fain's pretense of making Biden earn the UAW's endorsement, he is now aggressively hustling for votes, first for Biden and now for Harris. But there is no contradiction here. Pacifist notions of a ceasefire brokered by Washington is entirely consistent with preserving the grip of U.S. imperialism on the Palestinians, which is the very reason Democrats talk of a ceasefire in the first place. The real question is how to stop the massacre. Support to the liberal ceasefire movement is not a step towards stopping the bombs, but an obstacle. The only way to stop the bombs and to stop the genocide and the onslaught against the Palestinians right now is to wage class war from the U.S. to Israel and Palestine. This is integral to advancing the fight for Palestinian liberation. Fain, on the other hand, is very much an obstacle to doing this and going right head up against the ruling class and doing what needs to be done. For example, what needs to be done? Things like organizing the South in a way that can unite the working class and win, or by imposing union control at UAW organized ammunition plants over where and how those ammunitions are used. Like, for example, organizing UAW workers to stop ammunitions from being shipped to Israel. This could be done. But the whole purpose of breaking the pro-Palestinian movement's Democratic Party link is to organize it around a strategy that could advance the struggle rather than duplicating the defeats. And you can't even make an attempt to stop the bombing, let alone build an anti-capitalist movement, if you can't fight against the bureaucrats like Shawn Fain or Holden or Daggett or whoever, and the liberal politics of the current movement. How can you even begin to do anything for the Palestinians if you're propping up people like Sean Fain who laud U.S. imperialism that's in helping to enact the genocide? Now, one thing is certain, the fight for an independent workers' party in the U.S. won't make any advancements to free Palestine or anything else without putting the fight for Black liberation front and center. And you cannot do that without taking on the biggest obstacle standing between the unity of the working class, and that is the politics of the liberal U.S. world order that has kept them polarized along false lines. Right now, Harris and Trump are running neck and neck in the polls, and this race will be a tight one. The Democrats know they can't afford to lose any votes, so they are trying to rebrand their image, just a little bit. Now, in the name of country over party, Harris and Walz are going out of their way to make themselves as indistinguishable from the Republicans as possible, following in some ways the same playbook as Hillary Clinton did when she boasted support from Bush Jr. However, no amount of increased populist rhetoric or drinking Miller Lite High Life with talk show hosts or rendezvous with Howard Stein or stories about her Glock is going to erase the working class recollection of having been screwed by the Harris administration for the last 4 years. Democratic Party contemptuous wokeness combined with the effects of the inflation, the pandemic, and the revulsion to billions being spent on the Ukraine war, while millions of workers here lie in debt, is a very real and living memory for the working class. The more the Democrats suck up to neoconservative status quo forces like Dick Cheney, who workers hate, the more they make Trump seem like a real alternative. In fact, it has been the Democrats that have strengthened Trumpism. Now, we have spent a lot of time, working with and talking to Longshore workers on the East and Gulf Coast with Boeing workers here during the strikes. And it is no mystery that many white workers, but certainly not only white workers, in both of these industries are Trump supporters. Many of them, too, are quite militantly pro-union and keenly aware of their ability to shut the economy down. They righteously hate self-righteous liberals who claim that they are the problem. Needless to say, when we were talking to many of these workers, some of them are quite intrigued by the fact that we hate both the Republicans and the liberal Democrats alike. In particular, many were open to our arguments about voting for a working class alternative like PSL. Now, what we have learned in our conversations from workers who are going for Trump, particularly here in the Seattle area, is that while many can see the Democrats as the boss's party, they somehow see the Republicans as the little guy. In places here, like Everett, the Democrats have run Washington state for decades. And the fact that there have been numerous U.S. senators from the state known as the senators from Boeing, like Henry Jackson being the most infamous, probably also has something to do with the fact that so many workers, are looking to the Republicans here. Many workers know, deep down, they know that Trump really doesn't give a damn about them, but see him as a lesser evil to the Democrats. And this is precisely because they know that it has been the Democrats and neoliberalism that has gutted their wages, pensions, and livelihoods. They know that liberals won't fix their problems, so they look to the right wing to address them. In contrast, many Black workers we spoke to, in Longshore and here, that we talked to during the strikes, see Harris as the lesser evil to Trump because Trump is an overt racist bigot. Although if you're a migrant worker, I'm sure you could hardly tell the difference between, how Harris talks about getting tough on immigration and border security and how Trump does. Nonetheless, many Black workers justifiably fear 4 more years of Trump. They recall the fascist marches during his presidency and are worried about things moving farther to the right. Some are going for Harris just because she's Black and think she shares a common interest and might offer relief from racial oppression. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. Black or not, Harris and the Democrats are compelled to defend the interests of their class. They are part of the exact same forces responsible for exploitation and oppression. Now, a common refrain that you may have heard during the course of these elections from the liberals is that Trump is dividing the working class. Trump is dividing the working class, but he is certainly not doing it alone. The Democrats, do the exact same thing. In fact, they orchestrated the lie that Trump supporters were to blame for the racist policies of the Republicans to cover for their own role in maintaining racial oppression. They want Black workers to believe the lie that if you don't vote for Harris, you must be a racist in order to build mistrust within the working class. In order to maintain capitalist rule, it is necessary for the rulers to keep the wage slaves divided between Black and white, between Democrat and Republican, liberal and conservative, and so on. In fact, the liberal Democratic Party politicians, especially the Black and the so-called progressive ones, have been more effective at dividing the working class and keeping Black people segregated. Liberalism is the bourgeoisie's preferred tool to suppress the will of the workers and Black and white workers to fight. This is because they administer capitalism in the name of fighting for Black rights, or in the name of fighting for workers' rights, or for women's rights, and so on, so long as the Republicans remain the boogeyman. They want you to think that your foe is your friend. Any politician can get up and say they stand for women, Black people, Latinos, workers, immigrants, but these are all just empty words when their entire role is to preserve capitalist class rule. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the presentation, one of the things we were fighting with the ILA is to break down the barriers to uniting workers. Chief among them within the Longshore, the ILA union, is the segregated setup of the union locals, which are divided by race, craft, and tiers. For example, in the ports of New Jersey, there is literally one all-white local and one all-Black local who do the exact same work at the exact same location. Now, there are a number of workers who are disgusted by this segregated setup, but right now they are in the minority. And this is in large part due to the fact that some Black workers view having a separate local in the ILA as a measure of job protection. That if it were not for the Black local, they wouldn't have any job at all. They fear that an integrated local would push them out of the industry or into lower paying jobs. Now, a big reason Black workers think that they have to go it alone in their separate local, a union local, is because of years of experience of being screwed over by liberalism and the trade union bureaucracy, neither of which can do anything to attack the root cause of the problem. Liberal integration has done nothing to solve racial oppression and Black inequality. BLM liberalism has done nothing to stop police brutality and racist cop terror. Trade union economism has turned a blind eye to racial oppression, isolating Black workers and cutting them off from their crucial ally, the white working class. If it is not an economic issue, it is beyond the scope of the unions, say the bureaucrats. White workers are told that the problem that Black workers face are not their business by the bureaucracy. Black workers are told that white workers are the problem. Even addressing racial oppression within the workplace is considered divisive by the trade union bureaucrats. Maintaining the segregation of Black workers and segregation of Black people in the U.S. At the bottom of the society more broadly will only continue to bring down the entire working class. The ILA or any other union cannot afford to continue to be divided along such poisonous lines. The white working class will not make any real gains so long as there are layers of workers oppressed beneath them. To achieve their own emancipation from capitalist slavery, it is in the necessary interest of the white working class to fight against racial segregation and oppression. Consequently, the Black working class will not make any gains without integrated class struggle. To achieve Black liberation, Black workers need the white working class. The working class will remain trapped in a cycle of defeat along poisonous, false divisions if it remains atomized, fighting for the same piece of the pie. The working class must fight for the whole entire pie. However, this requires the revolutionary unification of the class across racial lines. Now, against the losing strategy of the current labor leadership, it is necessary to fight for an entirely new and different kind of leadership, one that is based on class struggle methods and class independence, and one that fights for a Black equality on and off the shop floor. And to begin with, rallying workers right now, as a step, rallying workers to vote for PSL would be a blow against the class enemy responsible for racial oppression and segregation. It would help build the unity of the multiracial working class by organizing around a common cause to fight back against Harris and Trump. And for us, as communists fighting in trade union struggles and Black struggles and the struggle against imperialism, to name a few, we have a lot of work to do to wrest leadership from the working class, from its parasitic and liberal misleaders of these movements, who are holding them back. But the bottom line is, to move forward, you have to swim against the stream. But for now, I'm interested in what you think about, our road forward and my presentation, and any comments or questions.